Good morning, and it probably goes without saying I speak for myself, not to be confused with any official statement. And what Tuan had asked me to do is organize a group of us, and so there were 6 of us involved in developing a paper which you should have received via email. If not, it'll be posted on the BGF website. So what animated us was really sort of the theme I think we'll get to soon, is looking really at cyber defense strategy for a nation. And I think the 6 of us used sort of the attack against the Ukrainian power plant as sort of our animating idea, and we looked at other attacks on critical infrastructure. And so at least I'd like to acknowledge the co-authors. Jackie Schneider, my colleague from the Naval War College, Mike Miner, who is sick at home watching us live via the stream. Hi, Mike. John Savage, who's a computer science professor at Brown University. Alan Citron, who works in the cybersecurity field professionally. And then Tuan. And so when you start to ask the question, what happens when you get computer scientists, political scientists, and people working in the cybersecurity field to write a paper, this is what we have. But I would like to start really a quote that I often like to start talks with. And so some of my students are here, so I'm glad that you came. So you've seen this before. But it came from the former NSA director, Mike Hayden. And so he described, quote, "Rarely has something been so important and so talked about with less clarity and less apparent understanding than cybersecurity. I have sat in very small group meetings in Washington, unable, along with my colleagues, to decide on a course of action because we lacked a clear picture of the long-term legal and policy implications of any decision we might make." So I applaud Governor Dukakis and Tuan for convening us regularly for the last several years to think about these issues, because I think days like this help us try to think more coherently about these problems. Before I get into sort of the principles that we developed to look at the nation state level, I thought first I would highlight some structural challenges, and very much informed by, I work on U.S. national security issues, so this is probably more endemic to U.S., but the more I engage internationally on these topics, there's some similarities, but some structural challenges in terms of thinking about why understanding cybersecurity is so difficult. First, I would say, related to what Joe and I raised earlier, is cybersecurity really challenges us how we think about domestic and foreign boundaries. And in national security, what's domestic and what's foreign is one of the really critical questions that we often deal with, because militaries, intelligence services are often focused externally, prevent invasion, meet challenges far from your shores. But when it comes to cyber threats, as we all know, boundaries have less meaning. And it becomes much more difficult to sort of think about national security and cybersecurity because of the boundaries start to lose meaning. The second idea, I think really, more particular to the U.S., is it starts challenging distinction among the different federal entities that are engaged in national security. So, for example, in the U.S., we like to clarify roles and missions, and what Nosley presented in terms of that executive order, really trying to help us think systematically about who in the federal government is responsible for cybersecurity, and there's ongoing efforts to do that. But we seldom think about the impact of organizational interests and the impact of different statutory authorities where law guides these entities. So that the easy examples I would highlight is the tension between, say, intelligence agencies and cyber commands. Former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, who's now the co-chair of the Belfer Center, has a wonderful piece up on the Belfer website from October, really talking about the fight against ISIS. And there's a few paragraphs on the cyber dimension that he highlights in terms of he thought as Secretary of Defense giving a simple order, go attack ISIS in cyberspace, would result in some success. But he very much highlighted that the different organizational missions conflicted. So for example, Cybercom might be able to go attack networks, but then the intelligence communities would regret the loss of the collection. And so you had an internal tension between the intelligence agencies and Cyber Command. Likewise, the Department of State was concerned if you start conducting attack has specific meaning in international law, and that would require notifications to our Congress first. And then secondly, if your attack is traveling across networks through other countries, clearance should be requested. And so I urge you to look at Ash Carter's piece from early October on ISIS to sort of describe a little bit more of these things. And then you could also look at, again, a tension between the private sector wants to give us higher levels of encryption, so we're all safer. But yet intelligence agencies really, I think I would go back to the early 90s when we first started this discussion on encryption, want to hold back higher levels of encryption because they need that to improve collection, improve transparency. Another challenge I would highlight that I don't think has been talked about too deeply, which I think is essential, so glad to see a number of people from the private sector here, is cybersecurity really challenges our understanding about what's public and what's private for defense. So sovereignty, as we all know, belongs to governments, but cyberspace is created, owned, and monitored primarily by private companies, publicly traded companies. The operating systems, the hardware, telecom lines, they're corporate, not government. And often these companies are global, not national. And so what we're starting to see in this space when it comes to norm development, it's not only governments and UN bodies, but we see Microsoft, for example, promoting international norms. We see Facebook attempting to counter misinformation. We see Twitter attempting to conduct sort of counterterrorism on its feeds. That governments and international institutions are not the only ones in this space, and I would sort of argue that companies are probably more important in my personal view than governments in this space. Another challenge really relates to some comments that Joe Nye had raised is it's hard to start isolating sort of malicious cyber attack, though he gave us sort of the positive on the US-China one, from broader bilateral issues. And so if we sort of, how we were able to get to that 2015 agreement, it was complicated by things that came before, issues such as trade, foreign direct investment, debt, North Korea. At the time it was climate change was important, as well as disputes in the South China Sea, East China Sea. Cyber was maybe one thing on the list of 10 that the two countries had to wrestle with. And so as we get inspired to think about how might the US and Russia, for example, come to some agreement, we have to look about in the broader agenda that exists between the two countries, not just the cyber agenda. And then finally, I would say challenges, as we think about the international system. Again, Joe Nye, I was thinking as you were talking, as often was said about Plato in philosophy, all of philosophy since Plato is but a footnote to Plato. I'm starting to think almost everything that we've been talking about international affairs and cybersecurity is but a footnote to you. So thank you for being a thought leader in this space. But as we start thinking about privacy and access in the US, we think privacy is extremely important. Internet access is extremely important. I know my kids think access is a basic human right. Europe, I think they take it even further to the extreme. The right to be forgotten and privacy laws, are much more, valued than, say, in the United States. And then we contrast that, where Russia and China, internet freedom is considered a threat to authoritarianism. So this complicates sort of the efforts, that Joe was highlighting in terms of trying to get to some cyber norms and some cyber agreements. Countries simply have different approaches. And then you see global companies sort of caught in between the two spaces that, for Google to operate in China, for example, they have to give up some of the values that they hold dearly when they operate in the United States. So with this broad context in mind, we're proposing some principles that would guide, and the paper really fleshes it out, so I won't dwell too deeply here. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'm going to, I'll direct all the hard questions to Jackie and John, because they were, I think, principally driving some of these important ideas. So the first principle, I would say, is characterize the threshold for action. If states understand when actors view cyber attacks as national security incidents, then they can create more tailored deterrent strategies. At the same time, understanding adversaries' thresholds for actions allows states to combat threats with counter cyber operations that avoid escalation. The second principle, which was more contentions with us, so I hope we talk about this one. So it's hard to get 6 people to agree. I think we found language we all agreed to. But this next one was a harder one, and I think countries are wrestling with this, is resolve hackback authority. Our compromise language was governments attempt to control subversive cyber behavior within their borders with prohibitions against hacking. But there's strong incentives, both technical and economic, for companies to pursue some level of hackback against cyber attacks. But to avoid escalation and misinterpretation, we think governments should retain the monopoly on legitimate use of force, and both kinetic and cyber, and prevent companies from conducting unilateral actions. But that's something I think we can talk more about. The next bit, because we're primarily interested in critical infrastructure attack, and so this is where I'm grateful, really both to Tuan's ideas and the governor's and Jackie's, in terms of critical infrastructure attacks are going to have a local impact. But often as we think about cybersecurity, we're up at the national and international level. But if the power here goes down in Cambridge, or the T is not working from a cyber reason, not for other reasons, it's really, we need to make sure that connection exists between national and local governments, and making sure local responders really know what challenge they're really facing when they show up to fix things. Next is really, collaborate across borders, and I won't dwell there because Joe had really highlighted that. Within a country, facilitate cooperation across critical sectors. I think we can look at certain sectors around the world. Some are better than others. Financial services have a very strong ability to share and work with each other. Telecoms do as well. Retailers less so. And so one of the things that we can think about is how you can facilitate coordination across different sectors. Next is engage the civilian information technology sector and to see how they're wrestling with this space, recognizing cyber is a civilian space, and so vendors have to be deeply involved in these discussions. Next, at the citizen level, empower digital literacy and education. And then next, really my colleague Chris Demchak from the Naval War College has done a lot of great work on resilience, for example. And so how do we practice comprehensive resilience? When those attacks do occur, things do shut down, how are companies, how are municipalities, state governments prepared for that? And then finally, build partnerships among developed and developing countries. One of the things I'm grateful for the discussions I had with Tuan is, we're having very deeply informed discussions here, and they are around the world, but what about countries that are really in that developing stages? How do we connect with them? How do we share lessons? How do we build those relationships? How do we make their systems more resilient, their citizens more digitally literate? So with that, I would just like to say, the principles are more fully fleshed out on the paper that you received and up on the BGF website, and we hope these will guide cyber defense strategy development at the nation-state level, and we look forward to your comments after that. Thanks.